Hey, welcome everyone to the ArchiCAD User Monthly webinar for July 2019. Oh, wow. Today we have a special edition of the user presentation. We're going to be doing an ArchiCAD training. So while it's always training related and always educational, today I have a special guest. John, you want to put on your webcam? John Hallgarth from Contrabim, who has been working with me on a project for helping ArchiCAD users with quantities and costs. What you'll see on my screen here is this is a free ArchiCAD training webinar on how to produce quantity takeoffs and cost estimates. And you're on either because you're registered for this or you're on the regular ArchiCAD user monthly webinar list. If you are an AIA member, you can get credit, CEU, continuing education credit, because we are accredited here as a continuing education provider. All you have to do is email support@bobrow.com with your AIA number after the session. Now, if you're not an AIA member, but you want a certificate of attendance that you can use for your own jurisdiction or your own records, then just email support@bobrow.com and request a certificate of participation. All right, so this is really a special presentation because John has been working in this area and is one of the most knowledgeable in the world for how to leverage the BIM data in ArchiCAD for construction management and ultimately for costing out a project. I first became acquainted with John back in August 2018 when we were doing a presentation on templates by users, looking at different people's templates and seeing what was interesting about them. And he volunteered with an email saying, hey, I have a template. It's a little different because it's primarily for managing construction projects. And I said, oh, well, tell me more about it. And he told me, and okay, let's share this. So we went over it last August, and I thought, now this is really special. This is something that provides analysis and reporting and optimization for a project that people have wanted for a long time: quantity takeoffs, cost estimation, budgets, but just he had really cracked the code for making it practical by combining ArchiCAD and Excel in a workflow that went back and forth, leveraging the best strengths of both. So you're privileged, in a sense, to attend this presentation because you're going to be one of the few ArchiCAD users who understand the potential of this and have the keys to getting going. So in today's session, we'll have an hour of pure training, maybe it'll be even 70 minutes or something. Yesterday I went a little over that. That's pure training. And we'll be making a recording of this available. Also, everyone who attends will be able to get the sample project file that John works on to show how the pieces are put together, and the Excel file. So you'll be able to, of course, take notes as you go, but you'll be able to watch it again. You'll be able to get those files and actually do some of that stuff on your own computer. And then after an hour, after that training is over, we'll be talking about a new opportunity for ArchiCAD users to get really complete training and support on implementing the system. We call it ARC 5D. So I'm going to make John presenter now, and I'll stay on monitoring questions from all of you. So let me see, make presenter here. Now, I didn't go through the usual thing of let us know that you can hear and see what's on the screen. Type into the questions box your name and where you're calling in from. Maybe something about quantity takeoffs and costing, what your questions are, or why you came, why this might be important to you and your firm. So I'm looking to see people to type in, and I hope you've been hearing me. Let us see here. I'm waiting for Michael. All right, Michael from Syracuse. Okay. And Juan Navarro from says all clear. Okay, Stan, hey, nice to see you from Portland, Oregon, and Richard from Bermuda. Okay, so we're do continue to type in to everybody who's on. I'd love to see who's on and where you're from. We have now about 75 people. I expect we'll probably go over 100. We usually hit, higher number than that for these monthly sessions. So without further ado, John, take it away. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into this, and then we'll get directly into the training here. And as you see on John's screen that we're sharing, this is an AIA continuing education training. So for the next hour or so, it'll be purely training, and then we'll be talking at the end about an opportunity to get some additional training and coaching support if you want to go further. So John, take it away.
All right, thanks, Eric. Well, happy to be here with you again. This is our third presentation of this, so I'm excited about this one. I think it'll hopefully be our best one this week. And yeah, it's just for everyone out there who doesn't know who I am. I come from the construction management industry here in Southern California. I've been using ArchiCAD for over 10 years now. And I worked for a contractor here in Southern California for a long time, and in that for that firm, I spent a lot of time in the BIM department, developing new workflows, doing a lot of different coordination, a lot of different supporting a lot of different aspects of projects from pursuits all the way through closeout. So one thing that we were always really excited about doing and trying to achieve was actually taking the models that we were producing and being able to really extract quantities and produce estimates. And it was always really a challenge to get everybody on board with doing that. It seemed like our estimating department always kind of reverted back to working in Excel. And at the time, we didn't necessarily have a good workflow for how to refresh information into Excel and continue working on the project. So a few years back, I really wanted to explore this potential further. It's something that I hadn't really seen many people out there do before. And I saw this potential of really developing a workflow that could really automate the quantities, automate the cost estimating workflow, just by really spending the time to build out a solution within ArchiCAD that would supply this workflow. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is kind of the theory and the strategies behind how that type of workflow can be deployed and implemented. We're going to break up this workflow into 4 different sections. The part 1 is just going to be a real quick estimating overview. Part 2, we'll talk about the different potentials and opportunities within ArchiCAD. Part 3 is when we'll actually jump into an ArchiCAD sample file and walk through some of those workflows of creating the properties, assigning properties to different elements, and then creating a report, exporting that out to Excel, and creating a refreshable link with Excel, which is really important. And then in part 4, we'll talk a little bit more about how we can deploy this by looking at a real life example and a real life project. So there's a lot of content to cover today. I'm going to try to kind of pace myself here and not talk too fast, but cover all bases. And yeah, hope you enjoy and can take away something from this that you can go and apply on your own projects. So Eric sent out an email earlier this week with a survey, and there was kind of a common thread between the responses that we got, and I really wanted to consolidate this down and hit on some of these questions before we get started. And it seemed like the most common question that we got or received from that survey was just how to organize a model for takeoffs in ArchiCAD. And the way I look at this is it's all about really determining how you want to structure your estimate at the end of the day, and then work backwards and then develop takeoffs based off how you want to organize all that content. So we'll talk about some strategies later on, just in terms of using different codes, using building materials to develop those takeoffs. And so that's one thing that we'll definitely touch on today. Another question was how to produce rough budget numbers. And if you might have seen the Excel template that we had shared earlier, that was all about how to create a target kind of rough estimate early on. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. A general question was just how to create and model at what level of detail to create accurate takeoffs. So we'll talk about all the different design tools, or most of the different design tools within ArchiCAD, and how those are associated with takeoffs, because it's all about which tool to create what output for supplying those takeoffs. And another question was how to extract quantities out of different materials out of composites and complex profiles, and that's a really important part to understand. And so we'll talk about that as well. And then we'll talk about some other things such as just how to manipulate costs on a large scale, as well as how to link your reports into Excel. So a few more questions here. Why do we need an estimate? Well, certainly there's some really important questions that we need to answer before a project goes too far down the road of design, and then you realize that you don't have the money to build the project, or you have to go back and redesign a project to fit your budget. So it's all about understanding what size and scope you can afford and at what quality. So having a good estimate and having a workflow for being able to produce quantities and get general ideas of the cost impacts can not only help you work better with your contractors and have a kind of a check for understanding how your contractors are producing their bids, or maybe your quantity surveyors or how they're producing their bids. But and a good estimate can definitely reduce your risk on a project, and it helps you kind of balance between the overall costs and the quality that you can assign and develop in your designs and in your models. So as an ArchiCAD user, why would you want to use an estimate, or why would you want to develop an estimate? Well, I think at the end of the day, it's all about servicing your clients and delivering increased value to your clients. So as a designer, I think it's really important to be able to provide this really valuable information to your clients, so that as you proceed through your design, you can really understand what those decisions are in real time, and be able to check your design and your rough estimates as you go from stage to stage during the design process. I believe that if you start looking at your designs in terms of quantities and estimates, I think it actually kind of forces you to improve how you actually model your projects. So it actually provides almost like a quality control tool to go through and review your designs, review how you're organizing it, review how you're modeling it, and I think at the end of the day, your models become better and well organized when you start thinking about your designs in terms of takeoffs and cost. At the end of the day, I think you can save time and save money if you're producing takeoffs and estimates in a traditional method of producing out PDFs and performing on-screen type takeoffs, or traditional paper type takeoffs. But if you're producing these takeoffs and using your models for generating this information, it can actually help you to not only speed up your own processes internally, but collaborate with your other team members as well, with your contractors or your key subcontractors. And then at the end of the day, I think being able to deliver this type of service can help differentiate your firm and ultimately win more work and set you apart from other firms in what today is a very hot market for architecture and construction. Okay, so talking a little bit about the estimating roles, I think contractors are typically thought of as the ones that need to take the lead on the estimate and drive the whole estimating process. But I think it really takes more than just the builder. It's really a team process, starting with the client, setting the budget, setting the vision, the pro forma on the project, hiring an architect who takes that vision and turns it into a design, bringing on the engineers to engineer and design efficient systems, not only for the upfront cost, but for the long-term lifecycle costs. Certainly contractors important for taking those finalized drawings and preparing construction budgets and contracts for with subcontractors. Subs know the scope of work better than anyone because they have to go build it, so they're the one of the most valuable resources out there for getting early cost feedback. And then of course we have suppliers who are supplying not only the material and equipment, but they also are controlling a lot of the costs, and depending on the markets, can really provide valuable feedback to the whole workflow. So it really takes a whole team. I think the more we cross these boundaries between these different roles, the more everybody can learn, and the smoother a project can go. Often I know it's a little scary to share information across these boundaries, but I think once you do, then it can you see efficiencies all across the board, and ultimately result in a better project that has a more accurate estimate and reducing risk all across the board. So an estimate doesn't just happen. It's something that develops over time. So starting early on with a conceptual estimate, you have a lot of assumptions. And then as you go through each of the different design phases, you start to convert those assumptions into what's known and measurable. And so over time, you want to really try to nail down what the scope of work is, what those quantities are, and try to correct the course before it gets too late in the design where you have to make major modifications. But after you get through the entire workflow, having gone through, bought out the subcontractors, built the project, at the end of the day, it's really good to think about all the things that went into the project, and then kind of do a post mortem on the projects, and try to understand the overall outcome, and then take those lessons learned and use those to inform decisions on the next type of project. So the more times you go through this workflow, and you're really paying attention to quantities and cost and quality, I think it just helps you be more prepared for the next round. And there's a lot of lessons learned and information you can collect to just help improve your workflow over time, and become more and more knowledgeable about design and estimating. So building an estimate, there's really two main components or two categories that I'd like to discuss real quick. We have hard costs that are associated with the final product. So these are usually organized into different cost codes or classification systems. The hard costs are certainly defined by measurable scopes of work, but they can include projections and assumptions, as well as those measurable takeoffs. So this is something that develops over time. We also have soft costs, which are the intangibles, the costs associated with staffing a project, with on-site management, with job-related expenses, as well as the different markups that we might need to include for insurances, for different contingencies, for design fees, for pre-construction fees, and so on. So I'd like to take a quick look at two different trains of thought for building an estimate, and starting with a target budget. So this is actually a snip from the Excel worksheet that we shared, that you can download. It's from the ArchiCAD website. So feel free to download this and play around with this target-based estimate. It's all about inputting a gross area, or the total size of a project, which is a really key indicator to be tracking. And then it allows you to kind of break down the scopes of work into individual line items. You can see here we have them organized generally by CSI master format. Each of those line items get a target gross area unit cost. And then we can produce these budgeted totals, which are the target cost multiplied by the area. So it's a very simple formula, but it helps you start thinking in terms of breaking down the scopes of work into the different packages that are going to make up your estimate. And then of course we have a target gross unit cost, which is essentially summing up all the different scopes of work. And based off that, we can certainly sum up our different budgets and produce a target-based budget. So this is a real simple tool. It's something that I think it's a good exercise to work through as a designer, to work through this exercise with your clients, as well as working through this with your contractors. It can help really produce an early estimate that gets everybody working on the same page. Another type of a little bit more detailed type of takeoff and estimate might be what we're looking at here, which is an estimate that's essentially organized under a system category. So in this case, we're referencing a uniformat classification, A10 in this case for foundations. And underneath that category, we're developing our different line item. We have different line item codes. Again, this is linking back into the CSI master format. And then we are listing essentially our scopes of work with descriptions that get manually inputted quantities. Each of those quantities needs a unit to define how it's being measured. And then we have a unit cost associated with those units, and ultimately a cost total, which is taking the quantity and multiplying it by the unit cost. So this is how I'd say majority of estimates are put together, just by listing the scopes of work, applying a quantity, and applying a unit cost, and then producing these cost totals in this manner. But we have a major opportunity here to really speed things up and leverage our models for producing these quantities, which are, I think doing the takeoffs is probably 80 to 90% of the work in producing an estimate. And of course, if we're working in ArchiCAD, we have this opportunity to extract all these takeoffs from our model elements. And the result of this is a lot of saved time. We can increase the accuracy of our takeoffs and spend more time trying to get the right unit costs, and making sure that the project is modeled at an accurate level with the appropriate quality. So moving on to part two. So I want to talk a little bit about ArchiCAD's potential for estimating, otherwise known as the 5D or the fifth dimension of the BIM world. So let's start talking a little bit here with properties. So since we have properties now in ArchiCAD, I think they added it in I think version 19 or 20. This really opened up a whole new world for how we can use our models for estimating. So data is best stored, I would say, in the property data, because it allows you to customize a lot of information. You can add formulas to it with expression-based properties. And you can also export this out to Excel, manipulate it in Excel, and then import it back in. So the property data is a really, really powerful tool that really enables you to work with the information behind the models. Properties are also really powerful for creating cost codes. So just like we talked about earlier with the different cost codes to identify the line items, we can achieve this certainly by using properties. Step one is just really identifying what codes you're going to use. Step two here might be just creating those codes and identification parameters in the properties. Then we just assign those properties to our model elements and use those properties to generate reports. And these properties can be really a useful tool for setting up the criteria for extracting model data based off those properties we assign. So it's a really powerful feature in ArchiCAD, and really helps you organize your model content in a powerful way. So another tip, just in terms of kind of aligning cost coding across ArchiCAD, this is just a quick example of how we can align our summary cost estimates with our reports using those same general cost codes. We can assign materials with those same cost codes, surfaces and fills, and even layers. So coding in ArchiCAD is, I think, really important, and it can help you get on the same page within your office so that it's really easy to understand what elements are drawn on what layer, with what building materials, what surfaces end up on what report, and ultimately linking into individual packages in your estimate. Okay, so units of measurement. As I noted earlier, this is something that we need to have in order to define unit costs. So it's really a required component of the estimating workflow. Different design tools produce different units of measurement, so we need to really be selective in understanding what tool we need to draw with in order to get the right outputs. Of course, we have unit costs, and we have some different levels of unit costs. So one thing I want to note here is the most simplest form is what I would call a base unit cost, which would be a cost that represents an entire scope of work. So for example, here with, say, a concrete element, we might have a single cost that represents the cost of concrete, the formwork that goes into place to create that concrete structure, the placing and finishing of that concrete, and we can decide whether we want to include rebar in that single number or exclude it and carry it elsewhere. So we have this opportunity to have an all-in number or start breaking things out into secondary costs. So we also have cost resources, such as breaking down the unit cost into material, labor, equipment, maybe adding markups, and then we can create an expression-based property that can take all those things, calculate them together, and then produce a little bit more detailed level of unit cost. But the more parameters that we have here, the more information we need to input and the more things we need to track. So I just want to be careful how many parameters you create so that you don't create too much work for yourself where you need to track everything on a very, very detailed level if you only need to track it on a more summary level. When it comes to composites, this was a very common question, is how do you assign cost to different materials within a composite? Well, we can create with properties what I call secondary unit cost, which is unit cost that allows us to break out different systems within a single element. So in this case, we have a quick example here of a wall with brick, insulation, CMU, and then an interior finish of gypsum board. And we can, of course, can create these secondary unit cost properties and then assign descriptions as well as cost associated with these different breakdowns of work. Okay, so moving on to reporting within ArchiCAD, we have, of course, interactive schedules, 3 different types: elemental, component-based, as well as surface-based. And these schedules can really be thought of as a window into the project database. It allows us to easily create reports that includes quantities, identifications, and other information that's built right into the model elements themselves. And when we start thinking about how we use these reports for takeoffs, really I always fall into the practice of creating these reports based around groupings of work. And I think that grouping these takeoffs based off the different trades of construction is ultimately the most beneficial way of doing this. It helps really organize your model and prepare for taking those takeoffs and linking them into estimates. And by breaking out the different scopes of work, I think it helps simplify how things are being reported. If you try to have too many things in one report, I think that tends to overcomplicate things a little bit. And so the more we break things out into specific scopes, I think the easier it is to work with and the easier it is to align to our estimate summary. So talking a little bit more about reports, really there's 2 main sections for each individual report. The first part is the criteria. So this is the essentially the filter that we can add to the report to either select out certain components or to select some and exclude others. So criteria is really important. And then we also have the fields. The fields are the actual data that we're adding to the reports themselves. And we have a combination of different sources for this, whether it's general information, whether it's data associated with specific design tools, whether it's the properties that we create or the classifications that we use to organize the properties. We can access object settings through these fields as well, and also IFC data. So the fields is really where we can list all the different information that we want in the specific reports and be able to manipulate those and work with those right within the interactive schedules themselves. So some tips for the criteria settings. So by creating some property codes that are really aligned to your estimate, this I find is one of the most simplest and easiest methods for assigning data to model elements and then using just a single parameter and a criteria to extract those model elements. So we'll play around with this a little bit later in the exercise. And then we also have materials, which can be useful when the properties may not necessarily give you what you want. And this is really good for extracting out scopes of work related to those composites. So if you have a wall, for example, that might have a brick finish, insulation, CMU, and gypsum board, you might assign that wall to, say, a cost code for relating to the brick, because that might be your dominant kind of feature of the wall. But we can extract out the insulation or the masonry or the gypsum board component based off the materials that make this up. So by setting this in the criteria, it allows us to extract out those different elements into a elemental report or onto a composite report. So we have different options here for listing. For the fields, just some general tips. I always recommend starting with what's called the general data. So it's the very first one at the top of the list here. It's next to this, it's got the little arrow icon right here. And so this is general information that applies to all different design tools, no matter what tool you're using. And it can be really useful for, I always start here when I'm listing the different types of quantity takeoffs, because generally these parameters will apply no matter if you're drawing with a column or a slab or a roof or an object. You can extract information by using these general settings. And this ultimately helps consolidate down our schedule so we don't have to list all the wall takeoffs, all the column takeoffs, all the beam takeoffs. We can use these general takeoffs to really consolidate our reports. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about elements and elemental-based schedules, this is kind of my go-to when it comes to generating reports within ArchiCAD. One of the main benefits of doing this and by using properties, it actually allows you to export properties out to Excel, fill out the property data there. You might want to share this, say, with your contractor or with your trusted subcontractors or with your quantity surveyor. And you can use this workflow for exporting it out, having someone else fill it out, and then importing it back into your model. And it just allows you to get other team members to work with that information as well. Or you might just be more efficient in inputting information in an Excel-based format. So we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Then we have component schedules. So these are schedules that are really powerful for listing and separating out building materials. One of the main features about component-based schedules is it allows you to list the same element multiple times within the same schedule. So this can be really useful when you have composites that have multiple scopes of work that you want to list on the same report. It allows you to list those out multiple times so that you can assign cost to each of those different components. Going back to our example of the masonry wall with a brick finish and a CMU framing member, we can list the brick and the CMU separately, assign cost to those two elements separately, and list both those into a same schedule by using the component-based schedule. So that's one example for how these can be very, very useful. And then we also have surface schedules, which I don't use that often myself, but it's another way of producing reports based off different surfaces. So if you put a lot of emphasis on your surfaces, then you might want to use these for just extracting out reports based off the specific surface you've assigned to those model elements. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the design tools. So certainly we have a lot of different purpose-built tools here. You may only be using the design tools here, kind of noted on the top pane here of this panel. If you get into MEP type work, then we have a whole separate categories for ductwork, pipework, and cabling. But all these are certainly purpose-built tools where obviously if you're adding a door, then you need to be working with a door tool. And so they, just based off the nature of the tools themselves, it kind of guides us in the direction for how we want to model with them. So we have basic settings, or basic structures, so walls, column, beams, roofs, and slabs. That we all have basic structures here, and so I just wanted to show this that we have these different settings, and if you're using these basic settings, then we get a lot of just useful information that represents an entire scope, very nice and clean in this format. Say if we're doing a takeoff and we're pricing something based off a length or maybe even a height, then we might need to consider what tool we want to model with. We wouldn't want to use, say, a slab to model something that we're producing out with a length. And so that's just something to notice to make sure we're drawing with the right tools to get the right takeoffs. We have the complex or composite structures, which allow us to create different assemblies with different materials. So this can be a really powerful method for simplifying how many model elements you need to add to your project. With these composites, obviously they're made up of building materials. And so when you're using these, just some general tips are to make sure you define a nice clean ID. Again, this kind of goes back to how I like to associate building materials with how those materials are going to be correlated to their takeoffs and their how they fall into the cost summaries. So using those IDs can be one way of just making this process a little bit easier to understand how where those building materials should be used and where they ultimately end up on the takeoffs and pricing. Having a clear description of these can also be useful for listing and also adding more formulas to our reports. So yeah, definitely recommend to spend a little time in building out your materials so that it's got nice, clean information associated with them. Okay, so some tips for using composite structures. It's always really important to make sure that your type is defined. And what I mean by type is whether your materials are part of a finish component, whether they're classified under what I would call an other, which might be, say, like an air barrier or insulation in this case, which certainly wouldn't fall underneath a finish or a core. But defining these really helps us when it comes to listing different elements in our schedules and being able to break these out into when we go to actually do the formulas and the costing for these different elements. It gives us more control over our formulas and more criteria that we can set to make sure that our formulas can be simplified and easy to use. Complex profiles are one that can be a really powerful tool. Certainly we can extract these into different quantity reports as well, but we just need to be careful how we use complex profiles to make sure we're not adding in so much detail and so many different scopes of work that it becomes more difficult to extract out into different reports and to get and to measure those scopes in the right units. So just something to be aware of, but these can be powerful modeling tools as well and also produce very useful quantities. We have system tools like railings, which have not only like the base parameters as we're noting here, but they also have subcomponents, and we can report these in different levels of detail. I always like with these system tools to price things based off a simplistic unit. So we can price an entire railing based off linear footage versus having to go in and break down the elements into their individual components. And that just requires more time on our end to assign the cost, assign the units, and do the research to understand what all those components mean. Same thing with stairs. I always fall on the side of doing it in a more simplistic method, such as pricing it by tread or riser, or maybe even by the flight itself. But of course, if say we're a stair detailer and supplier, then maybe we want that additional detail to understand all the different subcomponents that make up that system design tool. Same thing with curtain walls. We have these different levels of detail, but generally I fall on the side of simplicity here and just pricing things based off area or square footage or square meters, because it gives us a better baseline to compare different types of curtain walls and the overall quality and cost impact of that system. Of course, we have objects. We have openings such as doors and windows that we can add to walls. Certainly these can be priced by count, or we can build up different assemblies based off the different contents that make up those elements, such as with doors, we might have the panel, the frame, and the hardware, and we could add more details to that if we want. But different levels of details that we can assign to these objects, and often properties are going to be our most useful method for creating those different components or different cost measures within them, and assigning costs and building up these different assemblies. We have MEP tools, which can be priced in multiple different ways, whether by count, linear footage, surface area, by weight. So again, properties can be a really powerful tool for organizing this info. We have zones. So going back to kind of our target-based estimate worksheet here, zones can be used in a similar manner where we can take a gross area zone and then assign all the different unit cost breakdowns associated with that floor or entire project in one single zone. So these can be very useful. We'll look at this in an example here coming up. And then we also have zones for rooms. So these are different program spaces that we might assign unit cost data based off the area or the perimeter measurement based off length. maybe even the volume. So this can be really useful for assigning different finishes to a particular room, as well as assigning allowances for maybe equipment within that room or casework, or just assigning costs based off how much money we need to put in that bucket for that particular program space. Okay, so that brings us to our part 3, which is our sample cost workflow. So in this workflow, we're going to create properties. We'll create a report. We'll assign data to those elements in this little sample that we've created. And then we'll publish this to Excel and formulate a cost report in Excel. And we'll do so in a manner so that allows us to continue working in our model and refresh this directly into Excel. Okay, so put together a really quick time lapse here. This is just using the base ArchiCAD template. So this is what you get right out of the box when you open ArchiCAD and launch the basic template. So you'll see here we're just kind of creating a general concrete structure. You could think about this as like a single module or a single bay of a project. And of course, after we go through the process of assigning the cost and running the reports, we can then take this content, this 3D model content, and continue modeling the project and just copy it around, and it'll be all set up for us. So yeah, that's it. It's a real simple project, real simple example file. You can you'll get a link to download this after the presentation. And so let's go ahead and we'll jump into that sample project and kind of walk through those 5 key steps of setting up an initial target-based estimate. So, okay, so our step 1 was to actually start creating some properties. And we'll do this by going up under our options. And down here, we have our property manager. So this is where you can find all the properties that are included in the base template. We can see here that the ArchiCAD template has some defaults already included in how ArchiCAD is delivering their template version. So we're just going to roll all these up for now. And we can see there's a number of different expressions. These can be kind of fun to go through and test out and see how they're putting those together. But we need to add some basic information here, some basic properties that we discussed earlier. And we can create a whole new category here by clicking on New down here on the bottom left. And if we created a property here, it's going to fall just under whatever the default is here. But we'll start by creating a group, and we're going to call this identification. So these are going to be properties that we can create. And I'm going to actually take this and just pull it all the way up to the top so that it's easy to access when we go to add these to our elements. And so let's go ahead and create a property underneath here. So because I'm here in the US and CSI master format is our kind of default classification system, I'm going to provide a CSI category, and we'll just create a property there. We can also create a new property by hitting this little plus icon right here. And I'm just going to call this a CSI code. And I'll also give it a system code, which is something we use here in the US, which is in this case a uniformat 2 base classification, which helps us organize our model based on different systems. So we have these 3 codes or 3 properties that we created. Right now we can see that they're not available for any classification. So we could either go in and create customs by going into the custom and edit. And in this case, I'm just going to assign it to all elements under our ArchiCAD classification 22. And so by doing that, we can just quickly control what elemental based classifications these will become available for. So let's create another group here. I'm going to call this, well, we need to make sure we're choosing the group. We'll call this cost estimate. So this will be our group category for anything that's estimate related. And again, I'm going to pull this up here to the top and drop it right there. And let's just create a unit cost property as well as a unit or units. So we'll create those 2. And instead of going in and modifying these the way that we did before, we can actually just go in and pick up the settings, just like we can use the eyedropper for transferring settings between different model elements. We can do the same thing with properties. So we'll pick up the properties associated with the identifications we had already set, and we can just grab both of these and inject both of them. And we can see by doing that, it just automatically applied what classifications these are available for. Okay, so we also need to modify our data type. Up here under our identification, the string is fine for all these different codes that we created, because a string is really flexible. It allows us to add numbers as well as text. But down here under our unit cost, we need to redefine our data type so that it's a number format. So this allows us to have decimals versus an integer format, which is a whole number. So we'll definitely want to use number as our data type for our unit cost. Our units here, we could use a string if we so choose, but we could also set up an option set here that it gives us a kind of a group of different options that we can choose from. So if I wanted to price something based off an area, I might provide a square foot or a square meter as a value to select from. If I wanted to price it based off length, I would do linear footage or maybe meters. If I want to do it based off volume, I'm going to do cubic yards or cubic meters. If I want to do it just based off a count, I could probably just call it each, or maybe quantity, or piece count. There's a number of different ways we can define that, but I'm just going to leave it as each for now. If we're pricing it based off weight, I'll probably use ton here. I could also add one for pound, give myself two different options there. And then if we're doing stairs, maybe I want to do it by tread, so we'll just add that in as an option as well. So let's hit OK here, and we can see just by default everything will fall here under square footage. We could also check to leave these as undefined until we assign them, but we'll just leave it as a default for square footage. Or we could also add, say, one more here for select units, and we could change this. That just tells us that we need to select the units to be used. So maybe we'll leave it on that for the moment. Okay, so now that we've added this, we need to be very careful that we don't hit the X up here. We want to hit OK, because if we close out, it won't save these settings. So let's make sure we hit OK. And so now that we've done that, we have the opportunity when we go, if we select an element and we go over here under our info box, we can see that under our ID and properties, that's where we can access our properties. So when we hit the little drop fly out arrow, we can see that we now have these different identification codes as well as cost estimate codes, and we can then go in and start assigning how we want to measure our cost and our quantities relating to these elements. Okay, so before we start assigning a lot of information to these elements, let's go in and let's create a brand new report. So I'm going to go under my schedules, and in this case, we'll be creating an elemental based schedule. And I'm just going to right click there and go to new schedule. And so for this example, we'll be doing concrete because it's a very, I think, tangible and easy scope of work to define and analyze. So I'm going to give it an ID relating to cast in place concrete, which would be 0330 based off CSI master format. And I'm just going to call this cast in place concrete. Okay, so our first step here would be to set up our criteria. So right now we're just going to filter, just by default, whenever we create a new report, it just defaults to our element type. We could assign this to a specific tool if we wanted to filter by that tool, but we'll just leave it as all types for right now. And then our criteria. So as I mentioned earlier, I always like using properties as a criteria. So I'm just going to go under the identification, and we'll go to CSI category. And in this case, I'm just going to make this very simple and just call this 03 concrete as our CSI category. So if we read through this criteria, we're looking for all types that are also under the CSI category. And so we're looking for both of these because this is set to and. If this was to or, then it would be all types or anything with CSI category. which would pick up everything. In this case, we want to use and because it's a little bit more selective. So, okay, so now that we've done that, we've added the criteria we need to go through and select out the concrete. So let's go in our fields here, and we can see that we have a lot of different options here. Actually, if we had changed our type to say like wall, and we went to our fields, it would actually filter our criteria here, so we would only see what's available based off the criteria. But in this case, we're going to set this back to all types, and we'll start here underneath our general. And I always like using these general criteria to start out with, so let's just go through, and we're going to add in maybe our 3D length is a very useful one because that'll pick up our length of columns, beams, walls, and combine all those into one. We could add a 3D perimeter, which probably only applies to slabs in this case. We could add in our area. I really like adding this building material / composite / profile / fill, because this, depending on how the model elements are modeled, will return useful information regardless. So that's a good one to add. Let's go down here. If we added complex profile or composite structure, it would be redundant, so we don't need to add either of those. Certainly we want our element ID. We will probably want our, let's see, maybe the height and the home story. Home story is always a really useful one just for organizing content based off the home story that they're placed on. Let's continue down here. We could add layer if we wanted that. In this case, we probably don't need it. But we have our net volume. We'll add that. We might want to add our surface area just as a reference, our thickness. Our type can be really important because we want to understand in our report what type of design tool we are modeling with. And let's add our width as well. Okay, so these are just our general properties. And let's go ahead and hit OK for now, and we'll see if anything populates. Okay, so we don't have anything just yet. We can actually fit the width of this and see all of our properties here just by clicking this little double arrow fit width, or we can select a specific zoom factor. But now that we've created this report, let's go into our model view here, and we can start just by selecting a few different elements, and we can assign some data. So let's start with maybe just our foundations in this case. So I'm going to select all the pad footings, and we'll go in here and we'll just give this our 03 concrete, and maybe we'll give it a code of 03 30 10 cast in place foundations. And our system code in this case might be A10 10 foundations. We'll keep this nice and simple. And then let's assign it a unit for cubic yards in this case, and we'll just plug in a general value of $300 per cubic yard. So now we've assigned that. Let's see what we have showing up here under our report. So this looks okay. We obviously have things showing up, but we can make this look a little better, a little cleaner. We could actually show a headline here, which will start organizing the information a little bit for us. If we click this little arrow right here, we'll actually hide that pane and give us a little bit more space to work with. But let's go in and we never did add any of our unit cost or our identification properties. So we'll go in here and I'm going to roll up our general, and I'll go down to our properties, and let's just add that CSI code and our system code, as well as our unit cost and our units. So now that we've done this, I can actually roll this one up so we can pull this one down so we can see all of our different fields. And let's just give this a little bit more of a structure to work with. So I'm going to take these codes and just highlight them both and drag them to the top. I'm also going to take my home story and drag that up to the top because I like just having my identifications first. So we'll pull up our element ID as well as our building material, composite, profile, or fill. And then we have our unit costs and our units. I'm going to pull those up right behind there. And then we have all of our different types of quantity takeoffs below here. We also have our type, which I'll move up here close to the top as well. So just by rearranging these, this will give us a nicer format to look at. So we can see here, obviously everything now is underneath the CSI code as the heading. If we double click on these little breakers here, then we can quickly expand the width of these so that it fits to our width. If we wanted here, we could pull these down and pull this one over so that it will do the wrap text on those. We can click on these and that'll just consolidate these down. And yeah, so this is starting to look a little bit better. And of course I could click this little double arrow to fit the width, and I could roll these up as well. And then I could just click it again, and it's going to reformat that for me. So we can see that we have this stuff, these different cast in place foundations on the schedule. If we actually click on the header here and select in 3D, it's going to highlight those for us, which is really nice. But let's just go through now and let's do a quick search for anything that's concrete, and we'll just do kind of a mass application of some of these codes. So I'm going to add a criteria. This works very similarly to the criteria in our reports. And I'm going to go under not construction. We have a lot of different opportunities here to select. But I'm going to go under building material. I can either go in and select for what I'm looking for, or I could pick up one element and pick up the settings. And I'm just going to make sure this applies to all. And then we'll just grab anything that's concrete. And now I can start assigning codes to all of this. If I wanted to, I could start plugging these in right here, but that would actually only apply to just the columns. So to apply the concrete codes to all these different elements at once, what I'll do is I'll actually use the edit selection set, which you can find. It's the little hammer looking tool with the square around it. You can also get there by hitting Control-Shift-T, but we'll click this option. And we can see here that it's listing all walls, columns, beams, and slabs. And so all of these are selected and editable. And now we can just go in and quickly assign 03 concrete, which will apply to all of those elements. And remember, that was the one criteria that we assigned to make sure that it shows up on our report. We can also give this a 03, and we can make these general cast in place concrete. We might want to specify those further. And I'm going to leave the system code blank for the moment, just because we'll probably want to break out our system code a little further. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's see if all those fall in our report, and we can see they did. So, okay, that's good. So let's go through and we'll add a little bit more information to these and create a nice, more organized structure. So we can just grab everything here by, if we go to the top level of our report and select in 3D, we can see everything will be selected. But let's just go through and we'll just finish out some of these values. So I'll grab the slab on grade in this case. I'm going to give this an A1030 slab on grade, cast in place slab on grade. We'll just identify these a little further. In this case, I'm going to probably price based off square footage, and we'll just give this maybe $6 a square foot to just a general plug. We can grab this cast in place thickened edge. So here we could also call this cast in place slab on grade, and we'll give it that same code, A1030, because it's kind of a thickened edge condition, probably pours with the slab itself. So we'll just call this the same. Hopefully I'm labeling these exactly the same as before. In this case, I'll probably price this based off a cubic yardage versus a square footage. Just makes a little more sense. And maybe we'll just plug in $250 a cubic yard, because there's not much we need to do there except for forming the outside face. Okay, so now that we have those, let's check back to our report. Okay, so we can see here that because we assigned a new CSI code to those values, we can see that we're organizing this a little differently. I might want to take that system code and just make that our new header, because I think that's a little better way of looking at this content. And so now we can see that we have two different headings, and let's just continue through. We can actually grab this heading here, show in 3D, and that's going to show us everything that has not been assigned. If we hit F5, we can isolate those. Okay, so for the rest of this here, I'm just going to select it all. We'll go back to our edit selection set, and I'm just going to assign all of this to an a B1010, and we'll call this upper floor construction. We call it superstructure. We could also just do a selection around that top level there. I'm going to deselect those columns, and maybe we'll rename this to B, I think it's B1020 or B1030 is our roof construction. We'll just kind of rename this though for a moment. We'll call this roof construction. Let's grab these slabs, these elevated decks, and we'll just assign, what's the thickness on those? They're 9-inch decks, so let's give it a square footage takeoff unit of measurement, and we'll make these $8 per square foot. Okay, so let's finish these out. So we can just grab all of our columns and let's assign cubic yards. And I selected all those, by the way, just by selecting the column tool and then hitting Control A was the short key I did to quickly select those. And columns are a bit more expensive typically, so I'm going to set those at $700 per cubic yard. And I'm going to select my beam tool, hit Control A, and it's going to grab the rest of the, or grab my beams there. So let's assign these. We'll price these based off, we could do cubic yards or linear footage. We'll just do one on linear footage, $75. I'm just guessing in this case. And then we have a wall that's drawn as an upturned beam. And so we can, maybe we'll just do this off square footage. What's the thickness on here? It's only a little more than a foot thick. So let's just plug in probably $12 a square foot for that element. So we're just throwing some rough numbers at this. So now that we've done that, let's go back to our report and see how things are looking. So it appears that we've applied system codes to all different elements on this report, which is great. We have things nice and organized. And let's see our unit cost. Did we miss any unit cost? I don't believe so. I'm not seeing any zeros there. So yeah, at this point, I think we have assigned all the data that we need. And we can then take this report and just by dragging it from our project map here, we can place it onto our view map. And from our view map, we can place it into a quick little publisher that we set up and add it there. And then now that we've done this, we can see just by default it is set as a PDF. Of course, we don't want it as a PDF. That would, could be one format to export it, but we actually want to change our format here to, we have a few different options. We can change it to an XLSX and publish this out, or as I mentioned earlier, we also want to be able to link this into another, or we want to make this refreshable. So we'll talk about that here in a second. Let's first just check our settings for where this is publishing. So this is going to a folder on my desktop for this webinar. So let's go ahead and we'll just publish this out. And let's go into that folder. Okay, so it already populated here just at 2:03 p.m. It's a quick little check that I'm maybe running a little over time, but let's pull this up and just open this real quick. So, okay, so here's that report. You can see that it's formatted exactly how it was in ArchiCAD. And if we wanted, we could go over here to the right and start just creating a column for total cost and adding in some formulas here of taking, in this case, a column, it would be based off cubic yards. So we're taking our unit cost multiplied by our net volume in this case. And so that could be one way of calculating cost. But the problem with doing this is it doesn't allow us to refresh and overwrite this file each time, which would make this a headache if we wanted to change the model and then update this. So instead of doing it this way, I'm going to show you another method that actually allows you to update these costs and make it refreshable. And how we're going to do that is we'll actually build this right into this sample target based estimate. So we'll go to a sheet 1, and I've set up just a few little parameters here that we're going to populate. So our goal here, again, is to create a refreshable link. And how we're going to do that is we're going to place external data from a text file. So the reason in this case to create this from a text file versus another Excel file is because those of you working on a Mac would not be able to actually link in another Excel file into the Excel file that we want to work with here. So in order to do this, we actually need to change our format. And we're going to change this to a little bit more neutral of a format. And we're going to do that by just simply modifying our export type to a list format, which is essentially a TXT file. And so let's just republish this out now as a TXT. And we'll go to our Excel file. And I'm just going to go here under our data tab, and under get external data is where we can insert an external source from our text file. So I'm going to just click it right there. The reason I'm choosing this cell right here is because it's going to start with the topmost cell, which is going to be the header, the main header in the in our report. Then we'll have our secondary header here, which is essentially the same, the parameters that we added, and then we'll start with listing the data down below. So let's go here under our cost reports folder. We'll find that text file. We'll go to import, and then it gives us this little text import wizard. We'll just click through this because it typically comes through nice and clean. We'll hit finish. One last step, we could go into our properties and just kind of uncheck prompt for every or file name on refresh. We can just do refresh data automatically when opening. And we can either choose to preserve cell formatting or adjust column width each time. We can uncheck those. And anytime I'm doing this, I always like overriding the existing cells with new data when we go to refresh. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. We now have all that data in our project. We could double click these cells at the top. We could select all of this at once and double click the break to get those to reformat all of them at once. And so now that we've done that, we've created a link from that exported file into this Excel sheet where we can then go into our header here. And I'm just going to start adding a few formulas so that we can just kind of create off to the side here a more formatted report. So a code here, I'm just going to hit equals, and maybe we'll be selective with our code. So maybe we want to add in a little information here just to pull the left, maybe 8 values from this cell here, which will return just our code. So that's another way of organizing this. Our description, we can just hit equals, and maybe we'll use our element ID would be a good one. Our unit cost, we'll hit equals, and I'm just going to click on my unit cost column. Our units equals units. So very simple. And then when we get to our source quantity here, so depending on what unit of measurement we're doing our takeoffs in and associating our cost with, we need to give this a little bit more clarity on isolating out some of these different options. So how we do that is we can add just a very basic if statement. So we'll walk through the process here. So if our units equals cubic yards, and we can do that just by selecting our units column here, and then in parentheses typing in cubic yards, then the value, if true, is going to be our net volume. So, and we'll just close this for now. I'm going to add a 0 just at the end, so it's going to return a 0 if it's not true. So, okay, so we added one formula there. And if we want to continue building on this formula, all we have to do is we can just go if our units equals square footage this time, then let's come over here and we want to extract out our area. So that adds another criteria. And we can just keep building on this. So we add another if statement. So if our units equals linear footage, then we can grab our 3D length. Okay, and so value if false, I'm just going to make it a 0 for now. And so I was trying to click over to add a few more parentheses, but it automatically said it's trying to correct it for us. So it added those parentheses here on the end automatically, and we can accept that correction. And so now that we've done that, we have this set up for cubic yards, square feet, as well as linear feet. And so now we can just take our total cost, which will be our source quantity multiplied by our unit cost. So we've done that. We can just take these two columns here, and these two columns are cost related ones. Under our home, we can just make these a dollar value. And I'm just going to take all these columns that we added formulas to, and we'll now just pull this down to the bottom of our data, and we can see it automatically did all the calculations. And I can see here we got a few little issues here. So under our linear footage, we can see that we're actually getting this value with a foot marker in there, which is an issue for us because we can't calculate a number that contains a foot marker. So in the case of linear footage here, we just need to substitute out that foot marker. And so we'll do that by, it's already selecting the right text for us. So we just need to take the old text, which in parentheses, I'm just going to punch in a single apostrophe for that foot marker in parentheses. So, and then we're just going to substitute that out for a single space. And I'm going to put that in parentheses. And did that work? It did. So we can see that that value now is being represented just by 18 feet. Got rid of that foot marker, and we can see the cost is being calculated. And so now I just need to take that formula and just apply it down to the other values. And to finish this off, we'll just go to total cost, and we can do an auto sum here, and we just need to grab those values. We can pull this down a little further, and there we go. So now we have a total cost, and we've set up this link where we could then go and continue to work in our model, update our unit cost, change our units if we wanted, and this will automatically calculate for us. So let's play with that just real quickly. So let's just grab, we'll just go to 3D, and let's just grab essentially everything in our project that's not including what's on the column line. I'm going to deselect our little grids there as well. And so now that we've done this, let's just do a multiply by doing a Control U as the short key there. We'll do an increment and spread. And I'm just going to kind of click on one reference point I know to another reference point. And now that we've done that, we can quickly just multiply all this. Of course, we don't want an elevation change. But now that we've done that, we're starting to form up a nice little building here. Of course, we could do the whole thing in both sides, but we could just go back to our reports. We don't even need to look at the report, although let's check it out real quick. So now we can see there's a lot more content on here. We could actually go over here and merge uniform items, which will compress our report as well, but we'll just uncheck that for the moment. We'll republish this out. I'm going to hit close. We'll go back to our report, and under our data tab, we have a refresh all. So I think there's a short key there, Control Alt F5, probably easier in this case, just clicking the button. And so now we can see we have a much larger data source. It actually gives us a little preview when we zoom out far enough. But in order to update our costs, we just need to grab one single line here and pull this down so that it's down as far as our data set. And we can see all those just populated. And our last step here is just to update our sum so that we are capturing all the costs. And we could take this way down if we wanted. We could even punch into the formula here to take this down to 1,000. And so we could have 1,000 line items and it'll still pick it up in the future. So, okay, so that's how we can create a report. We can obviously add unit cost and units. We added a system code and a CSI code. And so that really concludes this portion of the PowerPoint here. So we created all these properties, we created the report, signed the data, published to Excel and formulated in Excel. And we created that refreshable link that allows us to be able to continue working the model and refresh later on. So, okay, so now I'm going to go to, we're going to do a really quick demonstration of a more detailed example of this. I know we're running a little bit over on time, but I wanted to try to present this in a slower fashion than just more than slower than a fire hose type fashion. So hopefully this has been easy to understand and slow enough so that you can actually take these things and go apply them on your own. But
so John, just before you go on,
yeah,
we still have a lot of people on the call. We've got 109 people on there. Please just fill in what you thought of this demonstration. Did you understand it? Were there some questions? I'd love to get some interaction. It was obviously a lot to absorb. You will be able to get a copy of that simple project file And you will be able to get a copy of the Excel file, so you'll be able to study this. And the recording of today's session will be made available. So let us know, how you feel about it. We're going to be seeing a rather interesting project coming up. This is by Gerald Hoffman, a designer from British Columbia, who was kind enough to share this project with us for this purpose, for being able to show a real project. I mean, he wants to get data for this project. I mean, he said, this would be so fantastic to get quantities taken off. So you'll be seeing that in a moment, but just please type into the questions box what you thought of the last half hour, the sort of step-by-step there. Whether it's clear, if there were some questions. So love to just get your feedback. And then in the next 10, 20 minutes, John's going to be showing how this applies when you have a real project with a lot more data. All right. So
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so let's switch over now to this example project. So this is the project by Gerald Hoffman, really nice 10-story condo building. And so what we're going to do in this workflow here is we're going to take a look at how we are doing the conceptual target-based estimate. And so that all starts with actually the zones. So we've created in this project just some general gross square footage zones that represent each floor and captures the entire, in this case, square footage of those floors, so that we could then start assigning cost data to this very simple geometry that gives us the quantities that we need to assign that total cost data. So if I select one of these, we can see if we go over here under our IDs and properties, we have a lot more properties set up in this case. There we have our cost estimate. We have actually a version of this which will convert it to international, but we have different cost factors. I'm going to roll this up. And down here we have a lot of properties associated with our conceptual estimates. So this should look familiar. These are all values that essentially align to our total cost estimate. So we can see there's quite a few of them there. And so what we've done is we've actually ran a report here that lists all those properties. And so using this report, we can go through and just list for each different floor, different values that make up these zones. So we can also go in here, and what I want you to do is pay attention to these values right here, the target gross square footage total and the target gross square footage. So if we modify these, you can see that those are actually modifying automatically, because in this case, those are actually expressions which are going through and adding up our total gross square footage cost, and then it's taking this total gross square footage and multiplying it, in this case, by the area relating to that zone. So we've gone through here and just plugged in just our general assumption of the different scopes of work that make up this project. And before well, actually we can go and we can see in this example, we have a lot more reports already set up. We actually have all the ones for each different scope of, each different trade in this case. In this zone gross square footage estimate, we can go ahead and just publish this out. And I guess I need to open up that file. So let's just go under open, and it's the 10-story example file. And so right now this file is set up where it's essentially blank. There is no data coming through here. We can see that there's nothing populating on our charts and our different graphics. Our target value column here, which is really what we're going to be supplying with those zones, is completely empty. And so we need to refresh this sheet in order to get that data to populate. So I'm actually going to go to a specific worksheet here that's designated for gross square footage. And because this is all set up, all these formulas are already going in and going to be doing our calculations for us. We don't even need to have our line items listed, because that's actually coming from the data from the report itself. All we need to do is just hit refresh on the sheet. And we can see that if I zoom out a bit, zoom way out, we can see that, oh, kind of lost it there, that everything over here on the right, that's all the data coming through from ArchiCAD. So this is, again, these are all the different zones, and each of those zones has cost associated with each different line item. So now that we've done that, we can see that we are getting an overall total cost, as well as a we have our unit cost here, as well as our total cost impact. And so if we go back now to our CSI summary, we can see that our target values have populated, our graphics have populated as well. And right now this is set up where our total package is actually just referencing everything here from our target values, as noted here by the items with these little X's noted. So if I turn off some of these, we can see our package total will disappear. And these little X's are just indicating that we're using our target value in this case to represent our total cost. So, okay, so that's, in very simplistic terms, how we can use these zones for driving cost for every single line item in our estimate. We can actually roll this up here and see the totals here for each of those different categories. Or we can expand this and see all the details for every single CSI category in this case, making up all of these different costs. So if we come down here to the very bottom, we have a subtotal on our hard costs, and then we have different markups here. So we actually are using, in this case, percentages for our general requirements and general conditions. Maybe we want to drop down our general conditions a bit to maybe 3.5%. We can make adjustments here based off what insurances we might need. If we want to add in, say, an escalation factor of, say, like, I don't know, 2%, we can do that as well. We have pre-construction services fees we could add if we wanted to, maybe 3% there if we get hired on early to work through pre-construction. Design contingencies, construction contingencies, design fees, we can either include that here or include that separately. So maybe we'll plug in a design fee. And then of course, additional types of insurances, permits, bonds, overhead and profit. And then from that, we get a soft cost total and a total cost. So, so we're doing all of that just from these very, very simple 3D zones that we've set up to represent our overall space. So what's really nice about this is we can load up these zones and kind of keep a library of these zones. They don't need to be the full scope of the project, but we can just do, say, like a little 10 by 10 zone that captures the full scope for this type of project and have multiple versions of this, and we can start comparing and looking at different cost scenarios to do some early budget planning using these zones that, very simple geometry, a lot of data associated with them, and very useful because it aligns perfectly with how we've set up our estimate template here. So, okay, so I'm going to switch back to a full view where we can see the rest of this project. And you know what, there was one other thing I wanted to show, which was how we can actually take these, our gross square footage report, and it might have looked maybe a little bit overwhelming to try to manipulate all this information within these sheets themselves. So in this case, I'm going to go over here and I need to make sure that these are editable before I export this. So what I want to do now is I want to show you how we can use that export import functionality that we've been talking about. So it's up here under file, interoperability, classifications and properties. And in this case, we're exporting the properties from the schedule. And so I'm going to just export this out. I'm going to call this version 4 in this case, and I'll just open this file after the save. So we're exporting that out. And okay, so here we go. We can see all of our different zones. So this is probably going to be a little easier for us to work with in this case. And I just want to unhide, if you notice here, our column A is hidden, so I'm going to unhide that. And I just want to point out that these values here, these GUIDs, are really important because these are really what is associating, in this case, what's a property down here, so we can just see which ones are actually properties. So all of these right here that are blank are not properties, so those are certainly not editable. But down below here, we have anything that is a property gets a GUID. And we also up at the top have the element GUID, which is really how we correlate this data back into our model. So one thing that you might notice here is these all have little green check marks around them, and that's telling us that this number in the cell is formatted as a text. So so we actually need to convert this to a number if we wanted to continue working with it in this format. So one little trick for doing that is we can just punch in a 0 here, and we can take this 0 and we can copy it, and then we can just select all of these numbers over here. I'm going to come all the way across and pull this all the way down so that I'm picking up all those values there. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a paste special, and we're going to add that 0 to all these different cells right here that are formatted as a text versus a number. And what that's going to do is it's going to convert those to a number for us. So it actually added the color as well, which is fine. But now that we've done that here, we can actually start going in and start editing this information. If we wanted to, because there are no formulas in these cells here for the target gross square footage, we could actually come up here and convert this to an auto sum. And I'm just going to pull this down so that we're now updating that so that it's got a formula. And so now I can start going in here and updating these values. We can go down the list of the scopes of work, and I'm just going to plug in some here just to make some quick adjustments. So we'll only do that in this case for the first column here, but we could just go down the list and just add, or modify different quantities and scopes of work. And once we're done with that, we can just go and save this file, and we'll close it down. We'll go back to our ArchiCAD file here. And so now we're going to import those updated properties. So we go back to our file, interoperability, classifications and properties, and then we're going to import those property values back into the elements. In this case, those elements being zones. So I'm going to grab our version 4, which is our latest version from 226 today, and it gives us a little preview here, and so we can see all these values that are about to be updated. And one thing to note when you're doing this, you can actually choose which ones you want to update. And because, as I mentioned earlier, these two, the target-based gross square footage total and the target gross square footage, those two are actually expressions. If I imported them in this manner, it would actually overwrite those expressions with these values. So in this case, I'm going to uncheck those two. And so that way we'll maintain those as the expression-based properties. And we'll just go ahead and import. And they were imported successfully. And now we can see that these have been updated. And actually, because that was an expression-based property, this one became updated. And so if we modify this, we'll see that that should remain as an expression. So, so now that we've done that, of course, to refresh this into our Excel sheet, we could just republish this. And we go back to our Excel sheet here, go to our gross square footage tab, and let's just refresh. And we can see that that just updated slightly because we've now made some updates to these, and so that will trickle all the way through into our estimate, into our summary sheet, and so now we've walked through that workflow. So so hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can export content out to Excel to manipulate it there. You can add formulas there and really customize that data, and then import it back in, and so that way you can make the best use of your time and use the tools that are most efficient for various types of data input. So, okay, so now that we've done that, I think the next step here is let's just take a quick look at a model-based example. So let's go back to our file here, and let's take a look at concrete. So I'm just going to double click on that report 03.3 for cast in place concrete. You might notice that my abbreviations here are a little shorter than what we were working with some of the codes, but I always like keeping these the coding as short and abbreviated as possible. just helps you be able to view more of the text in this case. And so now that we're looking at this, we can see that we have a lot of content on this report. We can see that we have this organized under a unit format level 4. And so we can see that we have things nice and organized. We have home stories, we have our type, we have a much larger option set here for defining our units. We have certainly our unit cost, and then we have a number of different quantities over here. And as I pan all the way over, we can see different values. And as I come all the way over, we have some more fields over here, such as the package in this case. So we could have assigned this to, say, different pricing packages and have it be broken out. So maybe it was part of the below grade parking. Maybe I assign it there versus our building package, but we'll leave that for now. We have our cost codes already built in, so that's an option set that makes it really easy for us to go and select. We have a subset code here, which allows us to be a little bit more customized in how we insert that data. So that's, of course, a string. And then we have another code here for our unit format level 3. And all the way over here, we actually have our building material in this case. So, okay, so now we've done this. Let's go ahead and we will publish this out. So I'm going to hit publish. And we can go to our Excel template here. And I'm going to just click on our cast in place concrete sheet. And we can see that right now there's nothing loaded in here. And all we need to do is just refresh the sheet to update that data source. And that automatically brought through all that information for us. And it's, nice, clean layout for us. So we can go back now to our CSI summary and compare the two of what we were originally targeting with that zone-based estimate of just over $22 per square foot. We can see after we've done the full takeoffs and assigned first pass at the unit costs that were a little bit higher. So in this case, maybe we need to use our number that captures a little bit more of a scope. And until we fully vet those numbers, obviously this would be the better one to include because it's capturing the full range of cost. And so we're not underbidding this by going with our target base. But our target base was pretty close. Maybe we just need to sharpen our pencils a little bit and see where we can reduce our unit costs on that takeoff. But that allows us the flexibility of quickly carrying a value with the zones up front. And then as we produce the takeoffs, we can update these at a later time. Excuse me. So of course we can go back to the model and just keep playing with these different values. Say if we wanted to take all of our upper floor construction, we can highlight it by just clicking on this in 3D here. Or show in 3D is essentially what we're looking for. We could isolate this by clicking F5 in this case. And maybe all of these columns here, if I click on my column and do a Control-All, we can see what the price is on these. Maybe instead of 750, maybe it's 700 a cubic yard. And just by quickly making that update, we could just republish out and see what that overall cost impact is. So of course we can play with this. We'd probably want to bring in our concrete sub and get their input on what these values actually should be or what it would cost for them to produce. And so just by doing this, it gives us another quality control tool to look at our quantities, make sure they're modeled in a way that's giving us good takeoffs. And obviously, if you were working with a contractor and they were doing their own takeoffs, if they could leverage your own quantity reports and work together in a collaborative manner, then you can see how this can be a real time saver so that you don't have to go through and make updates all the time, even as the design's changing. So we could go back now and let's just refresh this. And just by adjusting that $50 per square foot, or sorry, per cubic yard, we can see that lowered it just a little bit for us, but maybe we need to look at other places for shaving off more cost. So, okay, so that is covers a lot of the workflow. I think there's one more quick example I wanted to demonstrate, which is kind of a quick and very useful tool for storing cost data outside of the model, but being able to quickly apply it to the model. So I'm going to open up, in this case, it's a property value export for finished walls. And so what I want to point out here is that in this report, if I zoom all the way out, we can see we have elements above the line here, and we have data below the line. So the data below the line here, if we zoom in a bit, we can see in this case, we have this whole column here is designated for our outside finish type. So this is actually cost data that's not necessarily embedded in the elements just yet. It's more of like a library of data below the line. And what we can do with this is we can quickly take this data that's stored outside of the model, and we can use this as a library for updating costs into our model elements. So say, for example, here, the stucco 3 layers color finish. Say instead of 650, maybe it's 725. As we do this, we can see that these values up here automatically updated, and then we could just go and save this and import it back into our model. But we can apply a lot of cost to a ton of elements all at once just by using what's called a VLOOKUP formula. So essentially what this is doing is if this value right here matches anything in the list down below, then it's going to apply the corresponding value to it. So again, we can quickly just make adjustments here. Maybe it's not $1.80 for plywood, maybe it's $1.50. And so we just have to go through, update our unit cost down here, and we can quickly apply this to, in this case, these are composite walls that have all these different layers embedded in them. And so we can apply on a broad scale all this data really quickly and then just import it back into the model. So I just want to point that out as a way of just manipulating data quickly. And with that, I think we're pretty much at the end of our presentation here. So we covered our target budgets with gross square footage zones. We exported to Excel, manipulated it and imported it. We did a detailed cost takeoff with the concrete. We compared the two, and we talked a little bit about how we can use VLOOKUPs to store data outside and then apply that to a project. So this concludes the AIA training portion of this presentation. To claim the education credits, make sure you email your AIA number to support@bobrow.com. And for non-AIA members, just you can do the same. Send an email to support@bobrow.com to get a certificate of attendance. And with that, I will hand it back to Eric to talk a bit more about the ARC-5D solution.
Okay, well, thank you, John. That was amazing. So much information there. I'm going to take over the screen here, so I'm going to make myself presenter, and we'll be talking about next steps for you. You meaning everybody who is on this call, anybody who is interested in implementing a system like this. Now, I've been reading all these comments and questions, and I've been responding to them in the chat. It's clear that this is explaining a lot of the mysteries that have been really at the, beyond what people have the time to research and do. John, you've created a system, ArchiCAD plus Excel, that really makes this practical for any firm that could benefit from this. Now, if you are interested in implementing it in your firm, then you have some choices. You can take what we offered for free, you can study it over and over again, and you can sort of extrapolate and work at it and eventually, get some very useful data. Now, if you want to make that go a lot faster, shortcut that process, then we have an offer that you definitely will want to consider. If you go to archicadestimating.com/solution, you'll go to this page. It may look a little different. I'm sure I'm going to be dressing it up with some more graphics and things. But right now, you'll see that it explains that what ARC-5D is. And by the way, we named it that, ARC for architecture, 5D for the 3D of space, time, and money, so 5 dimensions, commonly used in estimating as a reference. So ARC-5D is our joint creation, the first and only integrated ArchiCAD estimating solution. And what I mean by integrated is it's not just the way to do it, the workflow that John demonstrated. It's a course, a template, and implementation coaching. So essentially everything you need to get going to do this. Now, before I go into what's in there, I just want to ask you to think, what sort of a difference would it make if 3 months from now or a year from now, you routinely could do estimates early on as you start design, or as you get going with design, as well as all the way through, where it was virtually no extra effort because the framework was already there. You're already modeling things. You just go in and assign cost codes. In fact, actually, they're built into your template so that things that are built with concrete already know that they're concrete. How much of a difference would it make to you when you're talking to clients that you say, we can make sure that your building will meet your budget, will actually get built to budget. And you don't have to wait till 3/4 of the way through design and design development before you start getting bids or construction documents there. So how much of a difference would that make in terms of winning projects, in terms of having the confidence that you are offering something that is very unique to your market? People will, I believe, see you as a market leader, and it is just going to be that much easier to say, you know what, you can pick any architect or any firm, but if you want to get this, we're one of the only ones that can offer it. All right, so how would you implement it? Well, of course, we'll go into more detail, take more time, answer all sorts of questions that obviously couldn't be addressed in just an hour and a half session here. So we've come up with a framework for a course. It's going to go for 6 weeks, about maybe 90 minutes each session, probably about 10 hours of material that, by any generous stretch, $497 value for a course. I mean, Graphisoft charges a lot more for all of their courses. And, you can see how skilled John is at organizing and presenting things. Well, we're offering it for $397 as an intro price, and we're going to throw in a reference library of step-by-step walkthrough videos. John has been developing these. Going to be probably several dozen, maybe as many as 75, 5, 10, 15-minute videos showing all the steps, like what you saw today, but for all the different pieces as he takes that particular project you saw, the 10-story building, and puts it into the Arc5D solution. So you will get that as part of the offer. Now, if you go to this page, archicadestimating.com/solution, and you click on QCE course, you'll see it'll open up just a simple order form, and you can then go say, I want to pay with credit card or PayPal, fill in your information here, and you will then be registered, and you'll be one of the people who gets that bonus of the reference library, which we feel is, certainly worth $1,000, and just in terms of all the detailed resources there. So that's one thing. Now let's go back to this page here. We have a template. Now, many of you have been working with Master Template. A few of you have been working with ContraBIM's C5D template, that's John's. So Master Template embeds best practices methods into the project file structure, and it is designed to make your projects more efficient, to be able to get the job out the door, better quality and faster, more consistent. And John has been integrating his C5D framework into Master Template, and we now have a hybrid template we call AMT plus C5D. If you were to buy them separately, it would come out to $1147. We're offering that for $797, so that saves $350. But right now, for the first intro sales, first 100 sales, we're going to be throwing in the building that you saw, not just a little building, that 10-story building. So you can actually see it all cost coded, all organized, just really study and reverse engineer and see how everything's put together. And we have another one from Caitlin Kelly. Caitlin was featured in last month's ArchiCAD user webinar, sharing one of her works, a beautiful California home with Spanish tile roof, several stories going into a sloping hillside, all sorts of things going on there. Well, that's going to be put into the Arc5D system, and she has agreed to allow us to share that, or she may give us a different project that's similar, that is actually more current, one that she's working on right now. So that'll be a real residential project where you can see how to apply it there. So you'll get these if you purchase now or in the first intro period. And so you're going to save a bunch of money on the template and get all of this put together. So that's $797. Now, we I've had many people use Master Template or buy my courses, and we're offering some loyalty discounts, existing user upgrade discounts. So if you are a member of my Best Practices 2020 course, you can save $100 on the course by copying this code here. And then when you go to the QCE course here and you put in that code and you click apply, whoops, actually I got the wrong thing. I need to copy this here, and we'll go in here and paste that in and click apply. You see it goes down to $297. It cuts that down. In the same way, if you are a Master Template owner, you have the current version of Master Template, you would copy this and paste that in, and it'll take your cost from $797 to $597. If you're a member of both and you want to get a combo here of the course and the template, well, actually, whether you're a member, if you want to get both, it's $997. If you qualify for one or both of those discounts, you can apply those codes there. We'll also have the implementation coaching. So what is that about? So the implementation coaching, when you're applying this, you will likely come up with questions, things that you just don't understand how to apply, things that aren't working quite right, just stuff that isn't covered directly, or it's covered, but you just don't know where to find the details. So John is going to be running, and I will be involved in this as well, an implementation coaching program. Now the course is going to run, this course here is going to run in August and September for 6 weeks. Now, if you can't make those times, it's going to be Wednesday mornings, 11 till probably about 1 on Wednesday, starting August 14th. If you can't make those times, no problem. We're going to be recording them, and they'll be available for permanent reference, of course. But after that course is done, in October and November, we'll run an implementation coaching program weekly for 2 months to help all of you who want to really put it to use right away and you have questions. That definitely has a value. We're saying $397 for those 8 sessions, but you'll pay only $200 more to add them to the template and course bundle, or to add it to the course itself. So you get a nice combo discount. And then of course, if you qualify for any of the loyalty discounts, you can use that code to take that down. So this explains the basics. As I said, there's going to be some more on this page here, but I am just thrilled to be able to offer this to the ArchiCAD community with John. He's doing the heavy lifting on this. Obviously, we're building on top of the master template framework. We're building on top of just all of you who have known me for a long time. I'm steering the direction, making sure that John is setting it up in a way that is going to be as effective in reaching the ArchiCAD community as possible. And together, it's just really been fun, and will continue to be a lot of fun as we work together to bring this to you. So John, you want to put on your webcam again? Let's see about questions and comments. So I've been, talking for 10 or 15 minutes about the opportunity. I'm going to just do some of the questions really quickly that I can answer, and then there's some that I want you to address, John. Well, Techley says, mind-blowing, great presentation, John, and thank you, Eric, for bringing this to us. And there were tons of other comments. I just won't read through them right now. Where do you send email for the certificate? support@bobrow.com. Is the solution a template for version 22 or 23? We're creating it for 22. There'll be a free upgrade to 23. We don't expect major changes in Graphisoft's framework that would require major updates, but we will update it, and we will have a supplement to the course to where needed. Probably it'll be an hour video showing how to use some of the new tools, like the new column and beam tools, and how they apply, things like that. All right, so nice comment from Pablo in Ecuador. Great presentation here. Okay, Brett, thanks once again. I'm going to review this. Okay, Andy Travers says, good skills, guys. We'll be getting a bundle. All right, I know you're an action taker, and we'll be doing that. Ken Brooks, hey, nice to see you. What if you already have AMT 22? Does that reduce the cost at all? Yes, that's what I was saying here. I guess it wasn't quite clear enough. You are a loyal customer, so since you have Master Template 22, you can get the new template by using this code, and you'll save $200 on that, on the purchase of the template, or the bundle that has the course and template, or the super bundle. You'll save that $200 there. Now, some questions I know that John, I'll just pass over to John. Steve Pribble, hey Steve, says, is the cost of labor intended to be included in unit costs?
So yes, in the base unit cost that I was trying to explain there, yeah, that would be an all-in number where the material, the labor, and the equipment, and even sometimes subcontracts are lumped into that. That would all be represented by a single unit cost, unless of course you wanted to break it out and track those items separately, as I kind of showed in the resource-based unit cost, where you could plug in a number for material, have a specific value for labor, specific value for equipment and a markup, and then you can actually use an expression to calculate the unit cost considering all those different components. So yeah, typically labor's included in the number, and yeah, the only time it wouldn't be is if you broke it out separately to track it separately.
Okay. Question from Aldo Cano from Bolivia. Is it compatible with ArchiCAD 21 and compatible with Google Sheets for cloud workflow?
So it is compatible with ArchiCAD 21. We haven't loaded that up in the 21 version of master template, but we could save it backwards. The only real thing you'll be missing is going to be the expression-based properties that are included in the workflow. So that's a very small percentage, and it's not 100% necessary. It just makes it a little bit easier for some of the coding and calculation to have those expressions. But it is compatible on 21. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Working with Google Sheets as opposed to
Google Sheets. Yeah. So some of the power in the estimate template is based off Visual Basic and being able to load and refresh data, and really to point to a certain folder that you're publishing these reports to, and then refresh from that folder. So a lot of that's built in Visual Basic, so that would not be available in Google Sheets, but you could certainly open some of these reports and have all the formulas, you know, and manipulate some of this in Google Sheets. But it's certainly built for Excel, not so much the Google Sheets version.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I think about, if you're serious about this, it's going to take some effort. It's going to provide tremendous value to your firm, and the cost of Excel, a few $100s, it's really trivial in that context of your efforts. Now, if you did want to experiment with Google Sheets and work with it, formulas will work, but some of the automatic linkages will require more manual linkage, more manual update, more manual import, things like that. And so, maybe you can get 98% of it working with some manual stuff, and maybe there's going to be some stuff that won't work at all just because Google Sheets doesn't have those formulas or things. But you're going to definitely lose some of the efficiency, some of the convenience that John set up, like click this button to refresh, bang, automatically does that.
You could definitely share some of the reports through Google Sheets. Say if you're trying to just share information with other team members, then yeah, you could take the content from the Excel template and then load that into Google Sheets and share it that way. But you have to still bring it back out into Excel and into that specific template to be able to certainly bring it back into ArchiCAD. But yes, it's best managed in Excel, I would say.
Right. Okay. So Bobrow Ukatori, hey Bobrow, says this question, this takeoff can be applied to ArchiCAD 20. So we were talking about 21 being mostly compatible. Would it work in 20?
So in 20, there are properties made available. I don't believe we had classifications in 20. I think that was right before they started adding classifications. So we'd have to play around with that to see if it is compatible all the way back to 20. If there's properties, you can do majority of this stuff. So I would think that we could at least have it, majority of this running. But yeah, I think it's something we just have to test. So I'm not sure the answer to that at the moment.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, we answered Mackenzie's question about version 22 or 23. So Gary Quigley, are you going to add the criterion properties to master template? Yes, it's called AMT plus C5D. So it is the combined template here. So it's not going to be in the base master template. So base master template that I will continue to sell and offer will have its wonderful combination of resources. But if you want to get this stuff, then you will get the new combined marriage of the two templates. And instead of having to buy, John's template here, 750, and then manually go and add stuff in, you can, for 797, minus your discount, because if you have AMT 22, you get $200 off. So for 597, you would get a new version of the combined template there. And so certainly I would never want to build all the stuff extra that John has built. Might as well just get it off the shelf there. So that's what we recommend. So Powell says, if Visual Basic is used, will this template work with Excel on Mac? I believe, John, you said that Excel 2016 introduced or completed the functionality, and so 2016 on Mac or later versions of Excel should work just fine. Is that right?
Yeah, fully compatible on version 2016 and later.
Okay.
Some of the functionality is, they did a big change in Visual Basic for Mac in that 2016 version. So the previous versions, there is some compatibility, but you lose some of the functionality. So it's 2019. I think most of us are on the 2016 or later at this point.
Okay. So Gary Quigley says, is your data safe with Google Sheets? I don't think so. Well, anything you put up online in theory could be hacked, but in general terms, if you put things up like a Google Sheet and you have it private and you only share the link with people you trust, then it's relatively safe. So, and I don't quite know what you'd be putting up there that would be so critical that someone would steal your estimate for a building or things like that. But that's always a question: is how what risks do you have, and what is your particular preference for managing the risk? But in general, you do have privacy for Google Sheets, and aside from some secret spy hacker, and I don't know why they would want this, frankly, but all right. So okay, so I'm looking through here. I think we've gone through all the questions. So again, to summarize, if you want to get ArchiCAD estimating really working in your firm, if you want the benefits to be able to say to prospective clients that, yeah, we can definitely, be doing budget numbers as we go along. We can optimize for your budget. We can, make decisions based on that all the way through, and we can actually verify quantities that the quotes come in from the subcontractors or the contractor. We can compare it and say, the concrete looks 20% higher than we thought. Let's find out why. It'll just be built into your services. Then you'll need to, if you want that, you'll have to implement this. If you want to implement it and you do it efficiently with less trial and error, more just sort of go and do it, then check out archicadestimating.com/solution for the ARC5D solution. As I said, the class will kick off in about 3 weeks, just under 3 weeks, on August 14th. So we will be promoting this and talking about it, both John and I, a lot between now and then. So if you want to get in and do it quickly and efficiently and get the bonuses that we're talking about, then I encourage you to sign up now or in the near future. We are going to be here for the long term. I've been working with ArchiCAD for 30 years. John is a young guy. He's only been going with 10 years or something with ArchiCAD. We're going to be continuing to support this in the long term, and really are excited about bringing this to the ArchiCAD community. So let's see if there's any final questions or comments. All right, so hi from Joe Elmere from Dominican Republic. So we've reached people, John, just for your knowledge. We have had people from Europe, Africa, South America, of course, around the US, the Caribbean, down under. We had a lot more down under yesterday when we did it a little bit later in the day. but we're definitely seeing interest from around the world. ArchiCAD, as many of you know, is popular worldwide. I mean, in the US, it's always been challenged by the dominance of Autodesk products, but I think we have a well-established user base who, like myself, wouldn't, if you couldn't pry it from my fingers, like the ArchiCAD. So if you feel that way about ArchiCAD, if you feel like you want to have this type of capability that will differentiate you in your work, then we invite you to join with us and check out Arc5D. So, John, any final comments?
No, just excited to be delivering this package with you, and um, yeah, if there's any other questions, shoot us an email. I'm happy to get back. And yeah, thanks, Eric, for hosting this webinar.
Yeah, my pleasure. So any questions about the webinar, any questions about Arc5D as a solution, or, to some extent, just questions about, when you're estimating, how would you do this or that? I mean, obviously, we're a little limited in terms of trying to answer tech questions right now. But, in general, I like, giving people the right direction. So if you have a question, like solid element operations was a question earlier, how does it handle that? Well, as far as I know, ArchiCAD does a very beautiful model revision when you subtract one thing from another, and the estimate is going to be based on that data. So you're really you'll have accurate amount of concrete, for example. That now you have to accommodate for wastage or other things. So if you're talking about taking a groove out of a wall, well, maybe maybe that's concrete is wasted or maybe not, depending on how your fabrication is done. But anyway, so questions or requests for AIA credit or for certificate of attendance, please send them to support@bobrow.com. I'll be back with more next month on ArchiCAD user. We have some interesting things we'll be talking about there for 3D visualization that I've got scheduled. But of course, between now and then, John and I are going to be getting this new course ready and ready to launch, and we invite you to join us on the journey. Thanks, John. And thanks everybody for being with us. Take
Thanks,
care.
Eric.
Bye.